Hey everybody, my name is Kenny Johnston. I'm a product leader here at GitLab, and I am the host for the 14.1 retrospective discussion. I'm a longtime listener, first-time host, so bear with me. The game plan for today is that we are going to walk through previous retrospective improvements. We'll spend about 5 minutes on that, walk through 2 discussion topics that we have queued up for today, document and for tracking for next time, track the improvements that we want to track for the next retrospective, and then wrap up. Before we get into previous retrospective improvements, I want to just remind everyone 14.1 was the release we released on July 22nd, just a couple of weeks ago. Some of the highlights from that release that we included in our release post were that we included Helm chart registry, CI tunnel for Kubernetes agent, merge request approvals, code coverage approvals in the merge request, as well as escalation policies. So plus almost 50 plus other improvements across the product. So really great work by the whole R&D department to deliver another wonderful release. And we're here to do a retrospective on how that went. I'll start with previous retrospective items. So the first one was Christopher, who I didn't see on the call, was tracking a improvement around maintainer availability. I think from reviewing last month's retrospective, the question was about our ability to have data and visualization about maintainer bandwidth and availability. Does anyone have a update on that topic?
Just, I don't have a thorough update, but looks like there's been some progress on that, but the visualization isn't available yet. So maybe next month we could check in again on that.
Great, thanks, Sam. I will queue it up for continued tracking to next month. And then the next one was Donald, who I think this was actually a carryover from the previous retrospective about getting merge requests merged to review P1s and S1s. And I think I remember the discussion was partially about we just haven't had enough time to see new P1s or S1s come in. Does anyone have an update for Donald? Oh, Donald, you're on the call. Great. Hey.
Yeah. Yeah, that's correct, your overview. Unfortunately, I was looking through the 14.1 issues and probably not unfortunately, maybe fortunately, there were no P1s, S1s within the plan stage. So nothing to really review as to whether the MR helped it at all. So we should probably keep this for one more. And then if we don't have one, I think we can probably just go ahead and create the MR at the global stage, which I'll do for the 14.2 retro.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, and I think not having P1s, S1s is a great outcome, and we shouldn't necessarily keep track of this until we have a proof point. So I like that plan. We'll track it for next release, and then if we don't, we'll move it to a global proposal. Tanya, you had the next one about licensing timelines. I think the description of this was a little brief, but it was that we'd had a number of instances where software licenses that were required by the development department weren't renewed in time or were renewed kind of in a rush at the last minute. We wanted to talk about, make sure we had a process for ensuring that doesn't happen again.
Yeah, and that's correct. Unfortunately, after the last retro, I was out sick for 3 weeks of the last 4, so I haven't been able to make progress on here. So I'll have an update for next time, so we should track this again.
Okay, thanks, Tanya. And then the last one was Sean Hoyle, who is I think a technical account manager for one of our customers, was pointing out that it was difficult to find information about some breaking changes with pages that we released in 14.1. And I didn't get this update specifically from the release group who owns the pages category, but I did notice that in our praise for 14.1, Nicole, the engineering manager for release, highlighted that the team was doing a great job communicating with customers and getting feedback from them about that process. So I don't know if anyone has a more detailed update than that, other than that maybe we should consider this closed because the team has been proactively communicating with customers. All right, then if I don't hear any confirmation of that, I think we should keep it open and we'll follow up for the next release. All right, no other carryover improvement tasks from the last retrospective. So let's move on to proposed discussion topics. So the 2 discussion topics that we didn't have any proposals or votes for discussion topics. So I chose these. They were things that I was interested in learning more about. So the first one was a comment from Nick and the Geo team who was highlighting that they're planning on doing ad hoc retros for like S1 issues or incidents and or large epics that were recently closed. I thought that was a great next step improvement, but I was wondering if other groups have experience doing just that and have any lessons learned for what criteria to use or how to best perform those retrospectives. Dan, I see you typing. I'm happy to take notes while you verbalize.
Thanks, Kenny. Yeah, the ops sub-department started doing, we had a OKR for the last quarter to do RCA's root cause analysis and retrospectives on incidents, contributing to those. I don't know if Sam, you want to expand on that a bit more. That was for the whole department, so I wanted to mention that.
Yeah, I could expand on that a bit more. So yeah, like Dan said, there's a company-wide kind of infrastructure-driven process for doing RCAs, and that's specific to incidents. So I think this question's a little broader than that. One thing we've been doing in ops is getting development teams more heavily involved in that process. So having teams, when there's a connection back to that development team, review those RCAs or complete them in the cases that they are not complete, which is pretty typical. So I think, we're still scoring that, getting some feedback. I haven't talked to everybody who's done that, but the idea is to get more of a feedback loop around what's happening. I guess there was another kind of thing that came up today I thought was relevant to this, where there was an S1 incident, about 10-minute degradation earlier today, could have been the European day. And it tied to an issue that is Gregorian, the Verify team, has been investigating for a while, which is related to kind of database transactions, save points. And we're actually planning to do a retro on that. This isn't a specific incident. This is more of a effort to investigate and resolve this issue. And one of the things that we're hitting here, and I think have hit, in a few, well, I've seen it more than once, is when you have a problem, there's, incidents happening because of that problem. And it's not always obvious. It's usually not obvious, like which group or which part of the system maybe is implicated or would need to, be involved to fix that issue. And to get to that point requires a lot of investigation, which is what we're doing now. And so there's this question of, we have this group, which also has a lot of other priorities, investigating this issue, which is looking more and more like kind of a global database issue, but we don't really have the information yet to say that with certainty. And, until we really fully understand it, we won't. So the idea was to have a retro that was kind of focused on answering that question. Like, how do we improve that part of the process? And, with incomplete knowledge, have a better idea of how to involve the right people in that type of issue. So some thoughts from me there.
Yeah, thanks, Sam. I appreciated your call out that I think this issue is kind of broader scoped than just S1 issues. And I would imagine that doing a retrospective on something like an S1 incident is a little bit more investigatory than doing a retrospective about an epic that might be a little bit more about process and how the team members felt that the process could be improved or what went well. Do others have examples of that kind of more ad hoc retro that happens not at a milestone level, a release level, but instead on an individual effort that maybe it spanned multiple milestones?
I'm not sure if it's applicable here either. I think one of the things that the package team does is to do asynchronous retrospectives on missed deliverables and issues. Yeah. So that ends up being on something where we missed something we committed to. We'd do an asynchronous, just it would be in the actual issue so that customers and interested parties could all see that. And in scenarios where we've had bugs that have come up, we tend to follow the same process in that team where we have a certain format for that. I'll grab a link to the handbook and drop it in the notes for people following along at home on the live stream. It's in the development department /ops/package, and it'll be listed in there.
I'm curious, Dan, do you have a way to automate that or like a a good process for remembering to do that, because I think in my original comment, one of the things is we had set out to do something along those lines, and totally on me. I usually forget to do it when the time comes, and so part of this was around trying to maybe create some more clear guidelines and automation to detect maybe something that runs on a schedule that can detect when issues of the appropriate criteria are closed, and then remind us to do these, or maybe kind of like what GitLab bot does and posts a comment pinging the right people.
Yeah, I mean, I think initially we'd wanted to do a sort of a more manual process to sort of understand the scope of what we're trying to deal with and what we're working with. I think the intention there was to provide that feedback to people, which requires one of the team members, usually the person working on the particular issue, it's a manual process for them to provide the feedback, or like what happened and where we ran into problems. And that led to us not being able to deliver. So I hadn't actually tried to automate that, because there's touch points in the milestone, and even when something's delivered, it's not necessarily focused on the milestone, but as we're reviewing our deliverables and what we're going to miss and what we've managed to achieve, that's sort of part of that process where, you know, usually it's the quad planning, but often it's just the EM and the PM that are actually talking through what we missed and why. And then just sort of having the team be reminded that these are things that we want to do, and we should provide that feedback to let people know why there was a missed deliverable or some other bug that came up as part of this. So I hadn't really looked at automating. There's not enough of them, I feel like, to make that worthwhile early on, and it seems to be working reasonably well. So I can't really offer any feedback on automating, although maybe that would make sense broadly across the org if we felt like async missed deliverable retrospectives or bug retrospectives would be valuable.
Thanks, Dan. Jerome, you got a comment? Yeah.
Yeah, I added a comment here saying typically we have RCAs and retros. RCAs are usually reserved for outages. So something like a P1 or S1, an incident happens, you want to figure out why that happened. And then the retrospectives are more on, I'd say, a cadence of milestones or epics. So if you close a large project, then you do a retrospective about what went well in the project, what can be improved, et cetera. Both of these actually have action items that come out of it and improvements. But I'd say that the RCA's format really is targeted at digging deeper into whatever that root cause was. And part of the RCA is asking the 5 whys. So you just keep asking why until you actually find that root cause. So I think both are great tools. I think we use them for slightly different use cases.
Great.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Nick.
I was just to say thanks for differentiating that. I think you're right that even though in the original comment it was sort of they were lumped together, like, yeah, there's a retrospective and an RCA are two different tools and are probably better suited to one's suited to maybe like an outage or an S1, and the other for completing a feature epic.
Cool. Great comment, Nick, and great discussion. Let's move to the second item, which was a comment from Scott in Verify Testing, who highlighted that their MR rate was going down. And one of the things they realized was that that might be because they had a number of technical investigations going on more than normal. So they created a handbook MR to kind of limit the number of those technical investigations. And I was just wondering if other groups experienced that pain point, or how you've solved it, or if you would consider a similar kind of caps to number of technical investigations in a milestone.
I think this is definitely something that I've seen in my teams whenever we have to do like a technical spike. That spike, takes a fair amount of research time, and that's time that isn't spent contributing code into our code base, therefore MR rates go down. I think one way to sort of maintain MR rates is also to just start documenting a lot of your findings. So whether that be in a handbook where you're sort of documenting what that technical spec which you're defining might be. So I'd say that that's probably one way which you can still show that your velocity is being maintained. It might be a little bit controversial, and probably discuss that more, but I think you're still able to maintain your MR rates and still able to show that you're making progress.
Mac, do you want to verbalize? You listed it as FYI, but
yeah, so we are very transparent, and we talk about MR rates on bugs. The data is in the handbook, so just want to make sure everyone is aware. So to add to the context of Scott, you can see the dashboard of the verified testing group here as well.
so Jerome, one thing I heard in your comment is maybe not necessarily have a limit on them, but having more concrete scope so that they don't necessarily expand to be larger than originally intended is helpful. Is that a fair summary?
I think I think it probably goes back over to the product side of balancing. You know, you want to do investigation issues so that you can basically define or lay out whatever that technical architecture is going to be implemented 2, 3, 4 milestones out. So basically you're laying the groundwork for future work. But at the same time, I think you need to show velocity in your current milestone. So I think it's a balance of both.
Thanks. Nick.
Yeah, I was just going to say that GeoTeam experienced this when we were investigating, supporting Petronia and geosecondary, and a lot of it actually resulted, there were some code MRs, but a lot of it resulted in just documentation changes and sort of verifying that things work. So while we felt like we were being productive, it didn't really result in a bunch of MRs, but it did result in still a pretty big feature announcement for something that was requested by a lot of our large customers that are on larger environments. So we did try to limit other similar types of investigation issues while we were doing this. But I also do wonder if there's for these types of for this type of work, if there's like another way to measure the velocity or impact besides just the MRs that are produced from the work.
I think it's worth pointing out that the XP tradition, traditionally where velocity and volatility came from, you measure points delivered, you know, not MRs, you know, business value delivered. And so it's interesting that we do measure MRs, which are a measure of the code, and that's not necessarily directly correlated to the value delivered, like you just said. Investigation, documentation, that can all represent user-facing value being delivered.
Yeah, and I think my comment here that I added to the document was just wondering whether, you know, as we're thinking about this sort of fixes, whether we're talking about being vastly under the MR rate target, or, you know, like, you know, 1 or 2 percentage points, then I'm not sure that we need to fix anything necessarily, because I wonder about the impact on, you know, product development timelines. We've got product goals that we're trying to achieve. I think one of the ways that we've tried to manage this is limit technical investigations to like a 1 point that you can be easily put into a milestone. And when we identify that something that's going to require a technical investigation, we do move that out into a later milestone, and then provide the team the space to actually deliver on that. So sort of managing those technical investigations in terms of their scope, how much effort goes into them, and then making sure we're organizing the dependencies. That's the sort of solution that I've been trying to use anyway.
I wonder if we could delegate the investigation work to one team member per release and rotate between releases. if it does not require collaborated effort from many team members. I guess this way it can help balance between MRV and also the investigation work.
Mac, do you want to verbalize your comment?
Thank you for that. I was seeing if people want to add on to the other point. I appreciate this discussion. I think listening well to the team's availability and capacity is important. Limiting the number of investigation is a great start. What can we do to help speed up investigations as a parallel track is where I'm heading at. Is there like an area of choice that we see a lot of challenges in investigating? It's taking long. What do we need in terms of test tooling, provisioning? Any thoughts around there that we can start to capture these ideas and maybe formulate a plan?
This may, I mean, exist in a lot of these cases, but I think having a clear criteria for kind of what you're trying to investigate, and ideally maybe there are ways to kind of iterate on that and potentially even deliver, you know, investigate, deliver. But I think, you know, one of the challenges with investigation is it can be open-ended, right? So it can be hard for someone to recognize like that's enough investigation now. Let's switch into a different mode. It's easy for it to kind of drag on.
Yeah, and I want to go back to Jerome's point earlier that I do think our product organization needs to make sure we're providing that scoping of how large, how deep, what's the end goal that we're trying to achieve in this investigation. And sometimes if we enter a milestone without that, it can end up being much more open-ended than intended. So I actually am happy to take action to, I'm not even sure if our handbook includes any kind of recommendation or guidance for product scoping of technical investigations, but I can add one if it doesn't.
Kenny, do you know if we have like a technical investigation template?
I don't think we do. I feel like I would have seen that utilized in a couple of occasions, but yeah, that's kind of where I was thinking is it would be good to have that guidance encapsulated in a template.
Nice.
Great. That is a good transition to improvements for next release. So we captured the ones that we carried over. I'll add the one from myself. Any other, oh, Tanya's capturing for me. Thanks, Tanya. Any other items we should capture to track for next release? All right, if not, so wrapping up 14.1 group retrospective, great discussion about handling retrospectives, whether those are S1s or EPIC, S1 root cause analysis or or EPIC retrospectives. And then making sure that we have strong scope on our technical investigations that might get scheduled into a milestone. And again, lots of great praise and other areas of improvement that are happening as a result of the group retrospective. So thank you all for your participation, and I look forward to the 14.2 retrospective in a month.